Hello, Abigail here, and this is just a little chat slash peek into this Uranus and Gemini ingress. I'm kind of going to be focusing on the history of what's happened in the past leading up to these moments and, kind of some of the threads of the last few times Uranus was in Gemini. Um, just so you know, a lot of it involves war and rebellion and liberation, um, which is really interesting considering Saturn being in detriment when it goes in and stationing retrograde very soon after. We're just going to kind of look at the history around it. This is not at all comprehensive. It's going to be a fairly, you know, probably around 20-minute video at the most. But I kind of want to just give a little bit of context, go over kind of the basic things that happen in this kind of a transit. So, this is about Uranus and Gemini. We are going to be seeing its ingress on the 7th of July very soon. Um, Maybe by the time you're seeing this, already happened. But that is happening. And Uranus and Gemini is a really intense transit that has been a lot of major markers in world events, specifically around the shifting of um, countries and wars and um, liberation and rebellion. It is also the Uranus for the birth of the United States of America. So interesting, interesting. We just experienced the Pluto return like a year and a half ago. Um, Depending on how close you count where Pluto was when it retrograded last, very recently. So that's an interesting kind of correlation. Also, so I'm going to be looking at the past 3 times it's been in Uranus, is going to be in Gemini, it has been in Gemini. So um, the last time was 1941. And you can kind of associate that with the middle of World War II. And the shifts, and it's a good thing to remember that these transits don't happen in isolation. The seeds are planted in other transits. So the seeds that were planted for the wars would have been Taurus and Aries, depending on how long the conflict was building. So that's what that's one thing. And it goes to that transit went to 1949. Uranus transits are about 7 or 8 years long. It really depends on where where the retrogrades fall. So you can kind of see that, and it always means very different things for very different places. If you think about post-war U.S., where there was a boom because there was a lot of innovation through the building of war machines, to be frank, and um, none of our infrastructure had been bombed. We maintained a really strong workforce by finally letting women into it, and then also phased them out during Uranus and Gemini. So you can see that kind of counterintuitive function where there is also this great change, but then there's also this regression, which very much reminds me that Gemini, they're the twins, and they're two separate parts, different sides to the same coin. And so there's often kind of very stark oppositions to things where one thing can be really positive and one thing can be really dark and negative. Um, so we had like women moving into the workforce and then the kind of backlash from that. If you watch older movies around the late 40s, it's really interesting because they were very aware of what was happening. Oftentimes we act like, they kind of bumbled through the repression of women as a gender, but I watched several, and I kind of struggle to watch older films now because when you see it, and you're like, oh, this is less enjoyable. It's not a funny comedy. There's a lot of dark themes in here. But there's actually a lot of them that recognize that women were functional and capable and powerful in the workforce. And the story that was told was that, but you can't make the men feel bad. Like, I know you're good at this job, but he feels bad. So you should really go home and pretend that you're a big dum dum. That was legit the messaging. I thought it was much more deceptive. I thought it was like this creeping thing that kind of, just snuck women back in. No, they literally said, these poor men went off to war. You finally got some freedom and ability to do things for yourself. But now they feel bad and they're sad. So you should repress yourself. So I think it's a really good example of the good and the bad of Gemini. Also remember that Gemini is ruled by Mercury. Manipulation and propaganda are very functional under Uranus and Gemini. And of course, Gemini is a great disruptor. So propaganda as a disruption to change can be a theme of Gemini, just as liberation as a disruption to the establishment can happen under Gemini. So just understand that there's a very strong duality within these Uranus Gemini transits. A lot of incredible change. It kind of reminds me of the fact that, you know, we've made a lot of progress in creating stuff, but plastics were really developed and really leaned into during Uranus and Gemini. Um, that's kind of the beginning of the selling and commercializing of plastics in the home was during this transit, and really hit full steam once we get into the 60s and 70s. So it was a really positive thing. It made things a lot more accessible in the moment, but has had really long-term impacts that weren't thought through and were also intentionally hidden. I think another important point, the last two Uranus moments have a fixed Pluto, which is really important. And also, fun fact, Neptune has just been flip-flopping. Neptune has just been flip-flopping between the Virgo and Pisces, basically, for the last all of them. Um, they have a Pisces one and a Virgo one and a Pisces one, and we have a Pisces Neptune now. It is technically in Aries now, but it's still in its transition between it and all of that buildup through Taurus, Pisces Neptune. So I find that to be a really interesting thread through all three of these sections. But yeah, I think there's a lot to be learned about history. If you think about the revolutions and changes and the Nakba happened under a Uranus Gemini. That was in 1948 when one of the biggest, accepting this moment, one of the biggest genocidal displacement actions that the terrorist state of Israel participated in, and destroyed the homes of Palestinians. And literally this past week, they burned out an entire village of Christian Palestinians, the oldest Christian village in Palestine. So yeah, it's really important to Uranus Gemini is liberatory and is this expansive changing, but it's also the morphing of old crippling ideologies into a new iteration of the same evil. And I want to be clear, the transit itself is neutral. Everyone partakes in it. It's really about your intention. And, whether you're consciously or subconsciously using these transits, your intention colors the kind of quality of what happens under that transit. So cruel, evil people using under a Uranus transit are using it to manipulate and lie and rob and steal. Um, I don't think it's a mistake that we've been creeping into, we had the largest displacement of wealth during Uranus and Taurus. And I am actually a little hopeful that the Uranus shift happened after this bill was passed recently, the Trump bill. I refuse to call it by its name. I think there's a lot of potential for that to fall apart under Uranus and Gemini, especially since Uranus goes straight into a trine with Pluto, which is the planet of destruction and death and signals the fall of empires. And we just had our Pluto return finish out last year, officially at the beginning of this year. So this is really potent. There is a lot of fuel and fodder for war within this from the people who are using this to manipulate the narrative, to change the story. The quote unquote birth of Israel, very influenced by Uranus and Gemini. And you can see it in the manipulation tactics that they use and the kind of the effectiveness of their propaganda. However, it's falling apart. Yay! I know, so it's half-hearted. I've been crying a lot today over the things we're talking about, actually. So we have the 1959 one. 1941. Sorry, I'm dyslexic. I'm getting my notes confused. So we have the 1941 Uranus transit It's very clear because that's a fairly fresh memory of all the stuff it built up to. It's the build up to the 50s in the U.S. Kind of another stark difference is because the UK and a lot of Western European countries and European countries were and Eastern European countries were very much in the line of fire in the war. Uranus and Gemini was a lot of lack, whereas in the US there was a huge boom because we hadn't been bombed. Um, so there's that kind of dichotomy that happens. And this is how astrology works. It is never just overall good. Different charts, different cultures, different societies interact differently with the energy, and situations affect the direction of the energy for different places. And it's also affected by something called cartography, which is the astrology of place. Um, on a map and who's there and how that affects their charts. It's endlessly complex. Similar to, looking at places like, South Asia and Africa and, places where there were also war fronts, but they are overlooked. And another good one is to kind of look at is the cleaning up of the image of the Japanese Empire. A lot of horrible stuff happened. Japan is horribly complicit in a lot of really, really atrocious things. Um, Not more than the US. Obviously, Japan suffered with the atomic bombs, which is also unforgivable. Just because the empire did something evil doesn't mean that the Japanese people deserve to be obliterated and harmed in that way. Um, but yeah, it's just when you look at history in the context of astrology, it's just really fascinating to see all these things play out, and you can look at them from multiple perspectives. And I think it's really healthy too. You should never just focus on one country. You don't have to go deep dive into every single one, but keep in mind the context of these things, um, and how the different energies affect everyone. You know, um, Uranus and Gemini in that 1941 iteration, we had Pluto and Leo. The nodes were in Virgo. North node was in Virgo. Pisces was in Virgo. A lot of really, similar vibes to this moment. If we're talking about qualities of things, nodes in a mutable sign, Pluto in a fixed sign. Something really interesting is across all of them, Jupiter is somewhere between Taurus, Gemini, and Cancer. Every single one. Two of them have Jupiter in Cancer. I think one of them has it in Taurus, and this current one has it in Cancer. So, real interesting to see how that's playing out. I am hopeful because this one is in Cancer, because it does feel as though we are expanding on something a little more under the surface. We're kind of expanding into something a little more tender and changeable, whereas Jupiter and Gemini is in detriment, is a bit of a chaos king there. Um, but yeah, that is the 1941. Then we go into 1859. And that one is, let me look at my notes, 1859 to 1866 is that transit. Uranus and Taurus, the North Node in Pisces. The Civil War starts in 1861. Once again, massive upheaval and change in the US. um, Both, change for the better in the sense that um, we kind of, through an accident of needing more bodies, freeing, the US from slavery in one way, not completely. If you look at the years after, you can see how that was walked back and turned and changed into different language, which really ties into this Uranus Gemini theme of these drastic changes, but there being this kind of insidious, manipulative narrative by people who want to manipulate the energy of change to not quite be the change it needs to be. And that's something to look out for in your own life and in your own desires for liberation and your own passion for progression. Is, are we actually changing, or are we just changing the words? Are we actually changing? Are we just adjusting the narrative just enough to be slightly better, but not to eradicate the root issues? Uranus and Gemini doesn't get to the roots. And I think it is possible to get to the roots. I think it's possible to harness that Uranus Aquarius trine to really get to the rot of the empire, get to the rot of colonialism, get to the rot of capitalism, and rip it out with mighty winds of change. But you have to commit to digging deep and do it intentionally. It's not just going to happen with the energy. There's a possibility that you can just ride on words and changing language. You can change deeper. You can change people's minds and hearts by default. We have Cancer, active Jupiter and Cancer activating, and Jupiter and Leo will be the next, which rules the heart. That'll be next year. So just know that propaganda is going to be real high. And you are going to have to be really intentional about the change that you make. Then the next one, and important point to note, this is also the lead up, these Uranus and Gemini ones do not rule the Haitian Revolution or the French Revolution, which are interestingly intertwined. France had a revolution while oppressing Haiti and didn't free Haiti, but freed themselves and then forced Haiti to pay them up until this century. Which is that kind of not digging things out by the roots, addressing an issue, but only cutting off branches, not ripping out the source of the evil. Something I'm really hopeful about the next few Uranus transits is I really hope that the Uranus return for Haiti is reparations. Is France paying back the money that it took, that they forced Haiti to pay them because they said, oh no, Haiti, we can no longer profit off of your bodies and your land that we stole, so you have to pay us for hundreds of years. And that's what they've had to do. And anytime you hear someone talk garbage on Haiti, just know that it is a deeply evil propaganda machine, because they have never forgiven Haiti for being the first country to liberate itself from colonization, which they found another way to oppress them, but that's not their fault. And then we have the next one, the last one, which is 1774 to 1782. We all know what happens then if we live in the US. 1776 was the founding of the US empire, from the English British Empire. And once again, this issue of not taking things out by the root. We could have freed Black Americans. We could have given women the right to vote. We could have made everyone actually equal and not just straight white men with money and land. And no, what we did is we made it only viable for straight, rich white men to succeed. And I think the beauty of having this perspective in this moment is that we don't repeat those cycles, that we start to decolonize our internal world so that this Uranus moment doesn't have to just be the leaves and the trees blowing around. It is us getting to the roots and ripping out the rot and planning something new and equal and free from strife and war. And I know you're like, Abigail, this is delusional. We can't do this. But I will remind you that Pisces, the North Node is in Pisces. It is the time to project big, impossible things into a future that you believe in. It is the time to harness that energy to believe that we do not have to repeat the same mistakes. And yes, we're fighting even bigger monsters than back then because now they are armed with massive life-destroying weapons, which in the other years, it was hand-to-hand combat, rudimentary bombs, and now we have world-destroying tools. But if you don't believe that something is possible, it'll never happen. So I know it can, but I believe in liberation. I believe that having the fixed Pluto trine is an answer. It's a call to action. We had the sextile in, let me look at my notes. We had the sextile Pluto in Leo in 1941. We had the other sextile Pluto in 1859 in Taurus. And we had the Capricorn Pluto in 1772, which wasn't in conjunct, interestingly enough. But I believe that this trine with Pluto, we truly can make change. We truly can change things. We truly can throw off the billionaires and the powerful and the oligarchs and the people who want to squeeze the labor class and disabled folks and poor dry so that they can have more than you could ever imagine possibly using, not only in one lifetime, but in several. If not, and with billions, it's endless. And that much money, it rots the soul. To care that little, to destroy that many lives, to extract from people destroys the soul. And everyone's like, well, if you had that money, you would do it too. And I'm very glad I don't have that money. And I choose to believe that if each and every one of us had access, that we would value human life more than we would the power to hold that life over someone else's head. So yeah, that's kind of the rough history of the last few cycles. We're in for quite a ride. Like I said, I am very hopeful with Uranus's and Pluto's placement in a trine. I am very hopeful with Jupiter in Cancer. I find it really interesting that the ruler is about to go retrograde in a couple of weeks. I do think there's going to be a stop and start quality to this moment where I think the beginning is going to feel like devastation. And I think the ending, there's possible victory and change, especially as Jupiter progressively gets into its Libra transit, which I think could be very, very delicious and freeing to have Jupiter in a Venus ruled sign where it really doesn't have a quality of like progress or no. Jupiter, it's not neutral, but it doesn't have either a detriment or an exaltation or domicile in there. It's just expanding into that Venusian energy. So, yeah, I want you to have hope. I want you to join me in believing in a better future. I want you to join me in believing that we can dig deeper with the help of Pluto in this cycle because we have Mercury, which is mind and rulership, and we have Aquarius, which is Saturn, which is boundaries and change and blocks and the structures that we live in. I think with the ability to change minds and to disrupt that, and the ability to put to death in a way the systems and the past. And if you think of Pluto's kind of moment in Capricorn and that being the birth chart of the US, Aquarius is what we build up in the next few years after. So the dismantling of all the harmful things that were put into place at the start of this nation. Yeah, and it means that a lot of us are going to lose stuff. But I don't think we're going to lose anything worth having if other people are oppressed. So yeah, I think this is a really powerful, potent moment. The North Node during the US moment was in Aquarius. So eventually Pluto is going to hit the point of that North Node the last time, not the last time, but the last 3 times back in the 1700s when that happens in the next 20 plus years. So some really big moments. So join me in hoping, understand that propaganda and the changing of language in order to maintain the status quo and to disrupt change because Uranus is the planet of disruption. Yes. And so while it can disrupt the status quo when we can make change, it also means the other people who don't have the collective interest at heart can come in and disrupt that change and turn it into something that is not that change, but is just a different language for the same thing. Israel as a colonial project is the perfect example of what I'm talking about, where we have, we can recognize how horrible, stuff empire has done for the last 100 years, but so many of us have turned a blind eye to the fact that Israel is exactly the same thing. And in fact, right now, an even, more brutal situation. And it's more brutal because of the color of the skin of the people it's attacking. Just like I can't, gosh, I'm really bad with names. I want to say Ugandan genocide that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that Germany perpetrated. Same stuff. The stuff that's happening in Sudan that's run by the, UAE and Saudi Arabia and the US. Millions of people. So yes, believe in change, believe in the hope of this North Node. The North Node is going to hit a square with Uranus at some point. We will have to face true change with disruption, and disruption not for the sake of disruption, but for true progressive change. And I'm excited for it. It's going to be a lot. But I will tell you that even though it feels like you are not, you were born for this time. The context of your birth chart is for this time. So have faith and hope that you are the right person for the right place. And believe me, it doesn't feel like that. I know right now I'm disabled. If you're disabled, it feels like we're not meant to be here, but we are. And we're meant to change things, like Uranus. All right, my loves, you can ask me any questions. Like I said, this is just kind of a rough overview. There's so many things, other things we could look into, so many other transits, what the personal planets are doing. Please do your own research. But yeah, please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this, and join me in believing in a future that includes everyone. That is better for everyone. A place where children and the elderly and the disabled and migrants, and where everyone gets what they deserve. And it is possible. Don't believe the lie that it's not possible. All right, my loves. I will see you later. Many blessings.